Hi, good afternoon. My name is Raquel Batista and welcome to Critica NYC. Today we have two wonderful guests that are joining us. We'll be discussing Latinas parenting during the pandemic and focusing on the experience of our children and the future of education in New York City during the coronavirus. Today we have Dr. Cristina Melendez. She is the CEO of Beyond Limits Family, and she focuses and does consulting work on education in elementary schools, right, with children. And we also have Marlene Peralta, who is a journalist and founder of a parents group called VamosForward. So thank you, both of you, for joining us on this afternoon for our fourth episode of Critica NYC.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, today I wanted for us to have an opportunity to, reflect on how the experience has been really so far, having our kids home, dealing with the pandemic, dealing with education, right? And then just day-to-day living at home, but then also have a conversation about what's going to happen this fall. There's been several different proposals about having children either do remote only, in school on a part-time basis. Many parents have been vocal on what should happen with the children. Some people are really concerned on their ability to go back to work and making sure that their children are in a safe environment, while there are others who are still very much concerned with the coronavirus and how the management of the kids in the school will impact the children themselves. And of course, the teachers, all the people who work there, all the people from the administrators to janitors to everyone, right? Everyone is really worried about what's going to happen. Some cities in the country have already decided to go fully virtual. Others are doing the hybrid. So, definitely I would love to hear from you guys about your thoughts. But before we go into all of that, please introduce yourselves. Tell us about yourselves, your experiences, and how you've been surviving and maybe thriving throughout the pandemic. So if we could start with Dr. Cristina Melendez, that would be great.
Well, Raquel, first of all, thank you for having me. For 15 years, I was an educator in the New York City public school systems. I taught everything from kindergarten to 12th grade. I've also been an administrator and a school leader coach and all those kinds of things. Currently in my own consulting work, what I do is really focus on helping parents navigate the school system so that their kids graduate successfully, but are also whole. And I think the part about being whole is like the really important part for me, right? Where I really work with parents to really think about what their kids' learning needs really are, how to get them to college successfully, so that they can persist, right? We're very good at getting kids to graduate from high school, better than we were in the past, still got a lot of work to do. But when they get to college, because they're not whole and complete, they sort of falter, right? And so I think that my biggest interest is ultimately, after all of my experiences, I do fundamentally believe that the system, the education system as a whole, has to change, and it really has to be reflective of where our country and our world is going, and that the people at the center of that change are definitely going to have to be the parents, because there's so much political interest in the common, in the things that we are accustomed to, that we can't break free, right? And so this conversation is so timely, because this is obviously a moment in our time where we just can't break free from what we had to rethink and reimagine. And so we're just caught up in this space. So it's interesting to be here and sort of thinking about it together and talking about it.
Excellent. Thank you, Cristina. And Marlene Peralta, who is a journalist. She's the founder of VamosForward. She's also had, or still has, a show also on Manhattan Neighborhood Network called Progreso Latino. Thank you so much for participating today. And please share with us, how things have been going with you during the pandemic, with your son, and the impetus on you finding VamosForward.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And as you said, I've been a journalist for many years. I used to be a political reporter at El Diario. That was my last job before actually moving into media strategy. And doing media strategy, I work with a lot of advocates, also advocates in education. So now being a parent, right, I have an 8-year-old boy. I can see like the multiple facets of what it takes to get our kids educated in this city. So that inspired me to also start a group called Movimiento VamosForward. And it's part of a news site that I just started like a few weeks ago, actually. It's pretty new. And the idea behind the VamosForward is how do we talk about issues in a way that moves us forward, that helps us navigate the system, not only education, but anything, like if you're starting a business. Because I don't see in any media, like anything that can help us move forward. Everything in the news is negative. So I needed to create some sort of site to kind of, provide those tools for those who don't know how to navigate the system, to get that help. So the Movimientos VamosForward, I did it in Spanish, and that I was very intentional about it because we don't have that much information in Spanish. Even the education department, right? Yes, they try, they translate things, but it's not the same, the information they provide, they're not taking into account that we have immigrant parents who have no clue how the system works in a new country, right? It's completely different from our countries. So with that in mind, I'm trying to share those tips and helpful information in that group. I have, I believe, like 40 parents so far. So that's pretty much what I've been trying to do. And coping at home has been really hard. I have a full-time job as a media strategist. My son was here with me. I'm a single mom. His dad was stranded, for a while outside New York City. So I was the only one, right? Trying to juggle the job and then trying to help him do his work. And an 8-year-old cannot just log into a computer and find all these folders that the Department of Education gives us to find assignments. So it was pretty hard. I mean, I think the one good thing I can see from this experience is giving my son individual attention for the schoolwork, which he doesn't get at school because, as we all know, schools are crowded. We got like 30 students in one classroom, so there's not that much a teacher could do to provide individual attention. So yeah, that's been kind of a summary of the nightmare, I would say, that most of us have suffered throughout the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have been in the same situation. I have a 6-year-old who will be 7 in August. She attends a public school in the Bronx. I actually got involved on the school leadership team at the beginning of this past academic year. And, what was interesting for me was that the school that my daughter attends is 60% Latino, 30% other, mostly white children. And, the leadership and the people who are involved on the parent association and who were involved on the school leadership team were mostly white. And even on the school leadership team, there was no Latinos. And when I ran for it, I said at the PA meeting, I'm running because there's no Latinos on the school leadership team and we need to have a Latino there. And then I brought on another Latina onto the school leadership team with me so that we could begin talking about the very basic and fundamental issue of translations, right? And having things accessible in Spanish. And I think, you know, many of us saw that problem at the beginning of the pandemic, where I know in my school, we didn't see anything being put out in other languages. Everything was being put out in English. And it wasn't until maybe a week or two later that we started seeing, you know, information being put out in other languages, which was very disturbing to kind of keep people out of the loop. And I'm also finding that even with these announcements, that they're not really sufficiently reaching out to our communities. You know, I definitely would want to hear both of your thoughts on that. Cristina, can you give us your thoughts on those issues?
I think that it's been a very interesting time for the Department of Education. It's a very old school system. That's really, it's huge, and one of the largest school districts in our nation. And it's really hard to think outside of the box for them. I think we have the smartest people working in the system, and yet they're still sort of hands tied to this commitment to this structure. And so all of the things that you're mentioning are real things that were really hard and will continue to be hard, right? When we think about the fall and whatever's going on, because there still hasn't been a gap, that gap hasn't been bridged around what should parents be doing at home? What should teachers actually be expecting, right? So we have the catch is that we have a system and there's a union that agreed to certain things, right, for teachers to do, and they're supposed to do that. And because that agreement legally, I mean, you know more about the law than I do, but legally hasn't changed, they're sort of holding people accountable. And so what parents end up doing is having to deal with all of these mixed messages that come from all over. And I think that for me during the pandemic with my daughters, one of the things that was really important to me was early on, I was trying to do all of that and log on at all those times. And what I realized was, no, I'm not doing any of that. I'm gonna stop. And what I'm gonna do is call or ask the teacher for my own Google Meet, where I'm gonna say, okay, so what is the goal? What is the end goal with this? And I'm gonna make sure to do it. Give me some checkpoints in between where you want me to talk to you, right? And that is what was most important for me to do, just for my own sanity. And I understand my privileges within that, right? Like I am an educator, like I understand the system, like I get that. But I think that what the system has neglected to do is to fully understand what parents are seeing, how that's happening. And they always do this default thing, which is, we'll send out a survey. Well, that doesn't work. It doesn't work at the school site when we want to get feedback. They always have to have an event and basically like bribe parents to fill out the surveys, right? We've all seen this. We've all been part of the process. It doesn't work. The surveys don't work because it's hard to explain such a high contact sport, meaning education, in boxes or checklists or numbers, let alone logging into something and trying to do that for many people, right? So I think we're not centering parents' voice at any of these conversations. We're having a lot of conversations, very high level, which is what we do as a system. And then when it trickles down, it's a game of telephone where no one at the end really knows what the end goal is or how to achieve accomplishing that goal. And so I wish I had more concrete thoughts about it, except we need to be stronger as a parent body in coming back to the system and saying, hey, so we're not doing this until you really get it together. Because we actually have that power as parents and we don't exert it enough, and the system defaults on, they'll just do it. They'll just do it. And the final part that I want to say is that if you don't push back, if you just try to do it and you don't get through it, the system is very good at then blaming parents. So we gotta be sure that we push back, we're very clear about what we can't accomplish so that our children are not held to those standards, because then they're very good at doing things like they did for summer school, which was, oh, well, some kids are gonna be mandated summer school. And I'm like, how do you even know who needed summer school based on what? and that was going to be indicative of whether or not they passed, right? And so it's really important to push back, because if not, then they're just going to keep going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to agree with that with you, Christina. I think, you know, my experience was I also reached a level where I just stopped. You know, we tried as best as we can, a first grader, 6 years old, having to do screen time. Then this kind of, for me, my experience was encouraging more screen time, which was not really what I wanted, but that's a whole other conversation. And, you know, it wasn't like, you know, and then they would send us materials, but then it was an issue like, did you have a printer? Do you have, you know, ink? How do you get to this information, right? And then there's so many other parents that we know that did not have the access to the, to internet, didn't have the equipment they needed, didn't have an iPad or a Chromebook or whatever. So, you know, there were also all of those hurdles, right? You know, for me, I would have to say that definitely by March 1st, which I know it sounds like early, but by that day, I knew that my daughter was not going to be going physically back to school in the fall. Like, I made that decision early on, and I'm like, okay, so how do I prepare now to do a homeschool-like setting at home to be with her? And, you know, and I'm privileged to be able to work from home and kind of like figure that out. But, you know, Marlene, you know, I know you've been working with the group of parents. Can you give us some feedback in terms of what you're finding and what parents are thinking about in terms of actually physically going back into the classroom, and how do they feel about the rules of like no lunch, no playground, no, like, you know, whether or not a child would be able to even have a mask?
Well, I think you might be one of the few people who actually prepared on March 1st, you know, and decided, okay, my child is not gonna go back to school to the fall. Because I feel like in my case and many other parents I know, we were just going with the flow because we have no clue. Like how do you manage? Right? Like, I'm starting to think of getting a tutor for my son after the chaos that we went through, you know, the last semester. But, you know, because we had also to juggle with work, and we had to juggle with, okay, we need to protect ourselves from the virus. Like, I didn't have time to actually sit down and say, okay, what's the plan or what are the alternatives? I've never had that chance, ever. Imagine parents who are not educated like we are, that, you know, that know the system like we do. So yeah, the one thing I've been surprised is, and just alluding to the survey that Dr. Melendez mentioned, because I've been sharing the link to the survey that the Department of Education has been pushing, right? Asking us to choose what, you know, what kind of education we want in the fall, whether it's part-time schooling or full-time virtual classes. And the majority ones that have answered my own survey have said that the partial schooling is what they would prefer. But again, we don't know what that looks like. Even though that's what we would like, we don't know what that looks like. Like, I would like to know, one of my first questions is, like, is a teacher, what's the contingency plan for a teacher? Like, if someone, you know, tested positive in my child's school, like, how are they gonna handle that? Are they gonna let me know right away? Are they gonna just get everyone out of the building? Like, what is it? And again, the physical distance of kids, right? Like, how many are they gonna allow in the classroom? I heard that it's like 12 students per classroom, but not all schools have the space to make sure that each kid is within, you know, the required distance. So does that mean that my kid's class has almost 30 students? That means that they have to divide the class in half, 2 different times. So that means what? Like, are we gonna have classes in the morning and then the other group in the afternoon? You know, all those questions we don't have answers to. And then they have information sessions that you sign up for online, and they ask you to write your questions ahead of time, but there's no guarantee that your question is gonna be asked. So again, it's like you know, it feels like they just try to check boxes on the book to make sure that there's, showing that they're doing their job.
Yeah.
But like, we're not getting, the answers that we need.
I find a few things interesting, right? One, parents in New York City have been organizing for decades around small class size, right? And it's interesting that now we're in this situation and that issue was never dealt with, right? And if that issue had been dealt with, most probably we would be dealing with a different situation, right? That's one. Two, I would love to hear from both of you about this notion of, Madeleine, you mentioned that you're planning on getting a tutor, you're thinking about it. There's been a lot of talk about these pods, right? Learning pods. And, people have been criticizing that, saying, well, how is that going to work for low income Black and Latino children who may not have access to parents who are going to organize a pod for them? Doctora Melendez, would you like to start?
It is, it's a divide, right? That's the truth about, folks ran on that ticket a while ago and the divide just got bigger and bigger as opposed to smaller and smaller, in my opinion. But, this is always the case, right? When you have resources and access to resources, you get to do whatever it is that you need. And if you don't, we expect the system to then take care of that group. And what ends up happening is that's not the case. And so here we are with these pods where kids are going to have, there are teachers that can get hired to make more than they make in their schools to teach 8 to 10 kids. Families are splitting $100,000, $130,000 5 ways, and teachers are very happy. Any educator, including myself, would be very happy to teach 8 to 10 kids for $130,000, right? Especially in a place like New York. And so there are many people that have organized that have continued to organize that. And I think they're going to come back having not missed a beat, if anything, more advanced than they were before, right? Because we know that those kids were already at an advantage because they already had resources, whether it's their parents are college students, college graduates, or they can hire things like tutors throughout their lives. They've been doing that already. So the divide has already existed. So now they're going to come even more advanced because they had an instructor, personal instruction for 8 to 10 kids for a whole year. So this is the time for me where I think we need to really think seriously as parents about what it is we need and what it is we're advocating for. Because I do believe that there is something like the pods that can be done as a system, that we have X amount of teachers, that we need to stop thinking about classrooms. Like, since when do we have to just hold on tight to there's 30 kids in this box? Cool, there's no box anymore. So what are we gonna do with these 30 kids and these adults? How can we switch them around, right? I think about developing nations that do a whole lot more creative thinking around this work with a whole lot less, right? So, I can speak for some of us, right? We have firsthand experience with going to school at different times or knowing people in our lives that went to school in the mornings and in the afternoons. We know as educators that we don't need 6 hours of straight schooling to actually accomplish our work. We don't. I know we sell that because, again, that's a unionized thing. That's our labor system response, but it isn't the need. The need is to have structured instruction for about 2 hours a day at most, really, if it's done right and we're focusing on the right things. All these other things are just fillers to make sure that people can work, that our economies can function, because we haven't changed that either, right? And so here we are with the opportunity to really change and create a dynamic system, and we always choose different. and our children are always paying the price for it. And when I say our children, it's really the poor children, right? Kids that are living below the poverty line, kids that are working parents, and that includes some of us that are college graduates, that are working, that make middle class money, but we still rely on the school system to support us, right? I'm a teacher. I didn't choose to teach my children. There's a reason for that. And so I am susceptible to being part, like what the schools do as well. And so it's just important for us to really create a voice. And I love what you're doing with all those parents, and really push back. That how are we using the adults in the system? I read something somewhere in one of the social media things where it said, you know, these superintendents and folks that are coming up with these great plans, before you bring it out, why don't you just walk through the school with your kids and actually do it and see how it works for you? Because it really doesn't even make sense in any real world. There's talk about like, you go to school and since your parents work, you can go to a center to also, you know, like they're activating all these centers as well so that you can also have childcare. And I'm just like, wait, so who's tracking the virus if that is the impetus here? Because I can track a virus if you have 30 kids in one class. I can't track the virus if this one kid then goes to another center to do other work, right? So there's so many variables that just don't make sense because we don't want to think outside the union contracts, essentially.
Marlene?
I want to take a step back on, you know, on that divide, because, you know, my worry is, you know, those parents who don't know the system, who may not even have access to a computer, like you mentioned earlier, and how, you know, the system is taking them into account. And this is why I wanted to create the space for parents, so that way I can, in a way, provide some of those resources available that they don't know exist. The one point that I want to make, it's more on the pushback, right? I think many parents do not know that they have the right to push back in the first place, right? They feel like, oh, you know, I'm taking my kid to the school and they are the one telling me what I should do, which, you know, that's not the way it works. Like, you as a parent have the right to make sure your kid is getting adequate, you know, education. So parents are not taking the lead because they don't know. And there's no mechanisms like, you know, if we speak English, or if you go to a school with more resources, we have access to those things, right? Because parents are organized. They know their right. They're Americans. They were born here. So they know that they can demand things, that they can raise funds if, you know, the government cannot give enough funds. So Hispanic parents or immigrant parents, many are not there yet because, again, they don't understand the system. So I think some of us need to make sure that we educate, you know, our friends, our families, that they have the right to demand and they have the right to have answers to their questions, and they have the right to demand that things get translated to them. And they have the right to ask, how the hell do I go and access this Google Classroom folder because I have no idea, right? I am an educated parent. I struggle with that. I'm like, how am I gonna understand this? It's so many different folders to go through. And then to make things even more complicated, they started with Zoom, then they switched to Google, I forgot what the name of the Google
Classroom.
Right. So I'm like, are you serious? And this is, again, going back to Dr. Melendez's point, that it's because of this system, right? You have contractors who provide the Department of Education with you know, these apps, right? And because the business didn't work, they're now making parents struggle in the middle of the school year.
And I have to agree with that. And it makes me think, right, part of the pushback should be, how can the DOE teach the parents? Right? I think it's like, you know, and that notion of that Cristina mentioned about, you know, calling the teacher, talking to the teacher about what your child needs and how to implement that. And I think that for you, and sometimes it all depends on the teacher. Some teachers are really good at getting on the phone with everybody and making those phone calls. Others, it takes them a while to like figure it out and then to say, oh, let me get on the phone with this person, you know? And so like, it would make sense. Everybody call all your children's families and have a conversation. Show them how to go through this. Explain, because there's some concepts, right, that I may not understand. How am I going to teach my kid? Because there's something, especially with math, that I'm like, really, why you people are doing math like this? And then, you know, there's the whole idea of, you know, if you want to homeschool, right, that's also like a whole other process. It's a whole other application process. It's a whole other way of doing the classroom at home. But that option is kind of not really discussed. You know, why do you think that is?
Because it defunds the system, right? I saw a principal, not in New York, but I saw a principal tell her parents, if you're going to homeschool your kid, don't take them out of school, just do remote learning and benefit from the resources that we have. The big catch there is really, she doesn't want to lose the funds per student. But the parents are also, if they walk into that trap, because I call it a trap, is that child is now held to the standards of the school. So Common Core standards, whatever the standards are, that is the expectation because you are still enrolled in school. So while homeschooling, and I urge everyone who's ready, I mean, I think that we talk a lot about defunding the police. We can defund the school system overnight. Like, we don't even have to worry about anybody else. We can do this right today, right? If you are committed, you can create your own pods, right? Like, we can do those kinds of things in low-income communities. But we have to, it goes back to our point about being organized, right? About getting the information, about fully understanding what it means to be in a pod, what it looks like, what educators need to do, because it's not the school thing. It doesn't have to look like that. It looks different. And there's so many benefits of being at home. There's so many benefits to homeschooling, but it is a choice you have to make. But there are real, school system can be amazing, but it can also break you. There's a huge price that many of our children, particularly our students of color, pay after going through the system. And we can repair that at home with love, care, and support. And what I always tell everyone is a confident child is a successful child. It has nothing, like, you can learn how to read on your own, honestly. And I know that sounds bizarre, but you can really learn how to read on your own as long as you feel like you can do anything in this world. And the only people committed to making sure that their children are confident, and the only people that can do that very well are parents, assuming that they can.
So that's a wonderful way for us to, let's talk a little bit about what can we do at home? What sort of things, whether we decide to send them to school, do virtual, do homeschool, what kind of things should parents be thinking about and looking towards in terms of supporting their children and helping them advance in their education? Dr. Cristina Melendez.
Oh, I'm on deck again.
Yes.
Look,
Yeah.
I think it's very simple to me. It's reading, writing, and math, right? Like, it's this idea that that's all that your child has to do every single day for 20 minutes each at minimum. If they can read for more, great. If they can write for more, great. If they can do math for more, great. And then my other pieces that I add that we always neglect because the system tells us it's not valuable. But what I know from my doctoral research is that those are the things that make us successful, right? It's this connection piece that Latino parents can do so well. It's like having chores. It's like ayúdame, washing dishes, taking care of people, taking care of yourself, right? Those kinds of connections, having conversations with your children about everything and anything that's happening. It's about really looking at your child and saying, this is not working. We're constantly fighting about this and then going to that place and saying, so that's not working, miss with your master's degree teacher. Give me an alternative to that because that doesn't work, right? And being very committed to doing that consistently. And it's not about fighting with your kid. It's not about trying to be the teacher. It's about saying, oh no, I watched, I tried, it didn't work, give me something else. That's the teacher's job. And I think that those are really the basic things, and what they're reading and what they're doing math on, it's actually less relevant, because in schools, what they're really doing is carrying out programs. There's a program that the school bought and they're just giving it to the teacher so that the teacher works less about trying to figure out what materials to put together. But reading is reading, writing is writing, and math is math. And that's just however you get it done for 20 minutes each day is all you actually fundamentally need to move forward. And if I told you the dirtiest secret in New York City public schools is that's probably most of what they're doing in school all those hours anyway. And that's the sad part, right? That they're probably just doing the bare minimum. You think they're engaged for these many hours? No, they're engaged for 2 to 3 hours the whole day. And some of that time is actually engaged in recess or social interaction and not necessarily in an academic setting. So think about that purely. Don't try to replicate schools. It's a whole different purpose. And just work really hard to do whatever it takes to build the confidence in your child in whatever way works in your family, whether it's accomplishing chores or having conversations, because that is going to return to the school system a child who feels like they're unstoppable. And a teacher can teach reading all day, but they cannot encourage your child to feel unsurmountable all the time. That takes so much energy. It requires a big development of relationships. And with the way we've been, like, if the kids go back to school full time in December, in January, I mean, that's half the year of like, we met each other through the computer, right? So, I mean, those are always my big takeaways and my sendaways to parents, like, forget about that and always ask for an alternative.
But you also developed some tools that are on your website as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I did, thank you. I developed this activities book. It's 10 games that I think are the fundamental basic games that you can play to develop literacy skills. They're all play-based. They're just speaking, listening, reading, and writing. And they cover those things in a very fun, family-oriented way. And I've had my own experiences, obviously, with my children, and that's the way I've made them literate. And I don't do the things that traditionally schools have done. And I've been very successful at not only doing it for myself, but for others. And so that's out there in the ether of the internet, but it's definitely on my website. You can find it. But it's a great way to just have everything together and not have to try and Google everything about how to teach my kid to read or how to encourage reading or how to do comprehension. It's too teachers like to make things really complicated because then it makes us feel like we need to do this work, right? Everyone wants to feel purposeful. So we all like, no, you can't do that. But you can, and you can do it in a fun way.
Thank you for that. And Marlene, what is your biggest worry with all of this? And what are you finding for parents? What are they most worried about because of this whole situation and the future of the education of our children?
I think the biggest worry is that our kids fall behind, right, on what they need to be learning. And this is why I mentioned in the beginning, that I'm trying to find, I'm trying to get a tutor schedule, regardless of what kind of education we get in the fall, right? Even if he goes in person or not, I want to make sure that a tutor is, going over some of the areas that he's struggling with. The one good thing I learned throughout the last semester was how when my son was getting individual attention, especially in reading, like he did much better in reading. Like he became like a really good reader. I didn't have a problem with that. He has still issues with comprehension. And this is where like I would need a tutor to help him with, just to make sure, right? Like he gets, he gets someone to make sure that we emphasize whatever he's learning in the classroom. And I think that's the issue with many parents, and that's the issue why many parents are going after tutors. Those who do have the resources to pay a tutor, because they're not cheap either. But I think that was the biggest thing that I could say benefited my son. I implemented the chores thing. Like he loved washing dishes, so I'm like, okay, you want to wash dishes? Go ahead. He wanted to mop the floors too every so often. I let him go because as days were passing by, he was getting bored, fatigued from being in these four walls every day, not doing anything else, because I couldn't go outside. We'll go to the park every so often, but I felt like that was a risk, taking him to the park. So I had to pretty much drop everything and say, okay, whatever you can do today, we do, and we'll take it from there. In our case, the teacher didn't have any video teaching for the first 3 weeks. Everything was just lessons on our own. But I guess when he started scheduling sessions with her group, he started getting a little more excited because he was also seeing his friends on camera. And they were conversations, so there were questions and answers, so he was motivated. But again, like Dr. Melendez said, they have a really short attention span. After those 20 minutes, my son was all over the place. He was walking around the whole apartment, when the computer was at the desk, because he couldn't sit down for 1 hour, with the teacher. That was just way too much. He's a boy, they need to go up and down and sweat and do all these things. So it was challenging. So right now we don't really know what's gonna happen. I just want to make sure that at least he's getting the math and the reading with the help of a tutor.
And also kind of outside of these subjects, right? The other thing that also, worries me, with my child, I have an only child, Marlene has an only child, is the social emotional learning, right? And being able to create those opportunities for the kids to hang out with other children their age, because they can't be with adults all day, right? And it's funny, someone made a joke to me that the kids are now kind of going through what some of us went through in the 70s and the 80s in New York City, when we were never allowed to go outside, at least some of us, right? And so, looking towards the winter, right? Right now we're in summer, we're doing outside. Some people are doing a little bit more, kind of creating their pods of families they hang out with. But when the winter comes, things may change a bit, and we may not have that outside option. What are you both thinking about your children and how to manage that?
I wanted to say something about the tutoring thing, because I want us to think about what tutors do and the impact. So I know a lot of parents spend a lot of resources, and some of them are very limited resources, and they're so committed to their kids' education that they commit them to a tutor. And what I want to say is that learning happens in community. It does not happen in vacuums, right? You don't sit in a corner and learn by yourself. And so most of the things that folks get tutors for, kids don't move because they're not doing it with other kids, right? So just be mindful when thinking about tutors, and that that's something you want to invest in. Just make sure that when you do it with someone who has similar needs or opposite needs, so that the children are sort of engaging in those conversations constantly. And then I think for the winter, I think that for winter, I'm gonna do the same thing I did in the summer, which is I'm not afraid of some cold air and digging for worms in the park, because I think that that's really what we would do in any other instance, right? And so thinking about all of the things that we wish we could do with our children, but don't have time because they're all in school, do those things. Whatever those things are, the cheapest ones if that's what you need, the expensive ones if you can afford it, but do all of those things and do them often, because that's also how learning happens. Learning happens in experiences. We often talk about our kid needs to learn vocabulary words and we flash cards at them. And it's like, that's not how vocabulary works. Vocabulary works in experience. So you have to be in the moment to then learn what's happening and then say, oh, so these birds are nocturnal because they sleep all day. That's why I couldn't see the bat at the zoo because he was asleep and it was daytime, right? Like that word stays in their mind forever. And so those are the kinds of reasons why experiences are way more important in creating knowledge than they are boxes in schools and staying in one place.
Marlene?
I've been sharing, some resources in my page too, where, there is a group of college students who created this tutoring program for free. They're actually looking to recruit also other tutors to provide free tutoring for those parents who don't have the resources. And it's pretty much to help the kids to do their homework. That's what they're there for. So that gave me the idea of like, oh, maybe I should be looking into tutoring to kind of compensate some of the, one-on-one teaching that he's not gonna get. So yes, and one of the things that I would like to do more, which I did maybe a few times, is try to connect my son with his classmates individually from, whatever class time they have. Because there were a few times where they were actually discussing the assignments just out of the blue. I'm like, oh, this is an idea. So I went ahead and got, the parents' information to make sure that we have the WhatsApp of each other. That way they can have like some, talking time on video so they can discuss whatever it is that they need to, because I feel like that reinforces whatever they're learning. If they have any questions, right, being with friends always makes it easier. We also did go to the park a lot, exploring. We downloaded an app that actually asks you questions, like an exploring app, where it makes you explore your park to find things that are in the park that you never see, and actually finding explanations as to why they're there. I did that because my son loves exploring. Like he loves asking questions and he has this imagination. So I want to make sure that, that he takes advantage of those things. And because we're going to have more time, I guess, might as well just use it in a way that he can learn new things. So you're just implementing things based on what he likes. It's same thing with the books, trying to get books of things that he likes. He gets bored easily, like I mentioned. He's a boy. He needs to be, outside his four walls. So I'm trying to see how I can incorporate that into like a daily or weekly habit.
Nice. That's wonderful. So I guess, in these last 10 minutes or so that we have, I'd like us to kind of go back to the beginning a bit and just talk about, if we're going to say to the mayor, to the DOE, what are the top 5, top 10 things that we want to see happening at this point in time? What would those things be? Doctora Cristina Melendez, you'd like to start on that?
I'll start, and then I don't know. We'll do it together. So I think in all of the New York City plans, there have been very few like working class parents involved in the conversations about how to restart the city. So I think there's business owners and small business people. I mean, there's like groups of so many wonderful, amazing people that other times would not have been invited to the conversation, but have been affected by the pandemic and are. So restaurants owners, all these people, wonderful. There are no teachers, there are no parents that are there as parents representing working class folks, right? So that's really tricky for me when you have 1.1 million children whose most parents are Black and brown. That's hard. So that's really important for me. Who's at the table and how much power do they have and how big their voice is really important. I think it's also really urging folks to think outside the box. We are still thinking that the box exists. We are in a pandemic mode. We have decided as a state, Cuomo tells us every day that the box does not exist, that we can be in phase 4 and then go back to phase 1, that these things that we just have to go with it and we have to do the best we can. So why can't we apply the same thing to our schools and really just really start thinking bigger and think about other models outside of the United States. I mean, China is ginormous and it has many children back at school, and we should be learning a lot more from them and other places that are in Europe dealing with some of this stuff after the fact, right? Because they're on the other side. So what are we doing and what kinds of learnings are we getting from them? Or are we just trying to take our system and do the best we can within our system because we need to demand more? We have a lot of adults in the New York City Department of Education that make a whole lot of money, and they can all be teaching 15 kids virtually for an hour and a half, like direct instruction, this sending lessons and watch this video, like that's not working. It didn't work, and we need to really just own the fact that that doesn't work, and we have to push forward as parents in expecting more from the system, that they need to think more, that we have the best thinkers, and they're not thinking enough is my pushback.
Okay. Marlene?
What was the question?
Like, if you were gonna do your top 3, 5, 10 things that you want to say to the mayor, to the DOE, to Carranza, what would those things be?
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Melendez, right? Like, other countries have been very creative. I've heard of situations, and I know that we lack space in New York City, so it's not like we have enough like outside space to hold classes outside. But I saw that other countries are doing, like implementing like agriculture classes for children, even like as early as kindergarten, teaching them where the food comes from and having them hands-on, like, doing, some cultivating, things like that. So that I'm sure there's schools here that do have green roofs where that can happen, right? Like, they have the space, or they have, backyards to do those. So I feel like being creative into how they can extend that, curriculum would be great. I don't know, field trips, right? When we can, not to have kids be in classrooms 24/7. If there's a way, we have tons of museums, we have tons of places that can be integrated into the curriculum. And those trips take place maybe once or twice a year. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's time to do more, but as a way to keep kids, separated from the full, school. But I feel like the problem here is not what I would like to see. The problem here is that we haven't been integrated enough, right? As Dr. Melendez said, like, there were plans to reopen the city, but we were not part of it when there was a whole controversy about closing the city, and it was because of schools.
It was. Thank God for the UFT for that one.
Right, like you wouldn't think, okay, because we have so much issues about whether or not to close, and the union was really pushing to get the school closed, which I agreed. Then let's do the same for the opening. Let's try to integrate the teachers and the parents to see, what options, right? Because we were given 2 options. We were not asked, can you suggest options? And then we can have people take the survey and see if those options work. No, I don't know who decided that these were the 2 options, and that's all we can, choose from. So again, like, they may say they're integrating parents, but the communication is not there. It's getting lost.
Yeah. And I think the other piece that's also getting lost is, and that there really hasn't been a conversation about, is what's going to happen to like new students coming into a school that don't know a school community. They don't know anybody. They don't know any of the teachers. They don't know any of the parents. How is that transition going to really happen for those new students? There's 3K, right? There's been a whole conversation. It's a relatively new part of the school, right? That 3K has been developed. A lot of parents were really looking forward to it, right? Because it was like the first time for many of those children being in a daycare / educational early childhood setting. That's not really being addressed, right? And I think, it's interesting when I see parents, for example, post on Facebook, social media, oh, so what do you think? When is it going to open? Have you heard this? Have you heard that? There is a big lack of communication happening across all different kind of schools, not only public schools, but I think it's also happening in Catholic schools. And, and sadly, a lot of Catholic schools close, right, throughout this pandemic. So then what's going to happen with all of those children? Where are they going to go? It's just a big mess.
Yeah, I was a little encouraged, but then I'm like, there's no plan. Like, because I know this is the idea that's been floated around using like nonprofits to kind of integrate some of the school curriculum, and especially for those parents who don't have the resources, and they did like a babysitter, like how they can integrate like nonprofits who do after school programs to kind of take some of that, some of that responsibility. But with that too, I'm very skeptical because a lot of those nonprofits don't have resources, right? They have their own issues,
yes,
right? And, and we are 2 months before school starts again, or less than 2 months. Like, and I don't see that there's any efforts to prepare, these options as, as valid options. So again, it's all like, it's a mess. It is a mess. And I feel like, our leaders were not really thinking on integrating us and making sure that we give them suggestions as to what could work for us too.
Well, ladies, our time is up here, but I really wanted to thank both of you, Dr. Cristina Melendez and Marlene Peralta, for joining us today and having this really important conversation about education and the future of education in New York City. I also want to thank the Manhattan Neighborhood Network for all of their work in helping us put this program together. I want to thank Zenaida Mendez, the executive director, and Freddie Pinto, the manager at Manhattan Neighborhood Network. And, again, for those of you in the audience who are looking for information, please check out Dr. Cristina Melendez's website, which is beyondlimits.family. And you can also find her on Instagram. And also Marlene Peralta also has a website, VamosForward.com. Is it .com? Yes, and you can also find her on Twitter and on Instagram. Again, thank you everyone for joining us again here on Critica NYC, and have a wonderful afternoon.